Hello and welcome back to Clownfish TV. It is me, Geeky Sparkles, and it's just me for this video because Kneon is elsewhere today. So the internet right now is kind of having a hissy, well, the media is kind of having a hissy right now about Bari Weiss and CBS again. This time they're going to release the 60 minutes episode, the segment on the Venezuelan deportees that they didn't run before, but they did run it yesterday. And so the media is all having a hissy fit about her waiting. And they're mostly, it seems, mad about the fact that she didn't run it as it was until she wanted to have time to get a statement from the other side so she could kind of present it in a way that you looked at all the information or both sides of the argument so you could make your own decision about what the truth was, which is how it used to be for years. You usually presented both sides and let each side have a turn to say something, and then you could from that distill it down to what you felt was the truth. And they're very upset about this for whatever reason. And now we have a look at this. Came from a big article written initially in was it the New Yorker, which leans a certain way. It is a very, very long article about Bari Weiss and about everything from like the time she was in elementary school on, and I kid you not. But the Wrap has distilled it down to this one, and we're going to look at both. Before we get into it any further, please like and subscribe. If you do, I'll give you a woohoo, and we're going to talk about it. So apparently they did run the 60 minutes feed, that the Venezuelan thing. Was it CECOT, CESCOT, whatever, I don't know how they pronounce it. The Venezuelan place they were holding everybody. Okay. So they ran the 60 minutes episode finally, like weeks after the fact, and people are mad. So according to this article from The Wrap, CBS news editor-in-chief Bari Weiss realized she needed to work on having more executive discipline, according to reports in the New Yorker, for her 60-minute segment, because they're mad about the last-minute decision to pull the segment on Venezuelan deportees last month. Sources told the magazine that the Free Press founder readily realizes and admits that she is not as knowledgeable as she should have been about timing of the marketing and promo process at 60 minutes. Sources say. So all this because sources say. And, could she work better on, timing and marketing for promos 60 minutes? Yeah, because you don't wait the 3 hours before after you've marketed it to say we're not going to air it. I agree that she probably could work harder on that. But I don't think wanting to hold it until you had, a chance to the other side to weigh in if they wanted to is a bad thing. However, that being said, they didn't weigh in on it. So I guess she just went and ran it anyway. So the source, the unidentified individual, says she brings this sometimes chaotic energy and work ethic of a startup, but she also realizes she needs to work on having more executive discipline. You're just all mad because she's not saying what you want her to say. It's the whole thing. So we'll look at what the rest of this article says, and we'll go look at the other article parts of it. And I don't think that she's all that bad in some regards, because they're talking about how she wanted to give both sides a chance, and I think that's fair reporting, honestly. Last December, she pulled the segment about the Venezuelan migrants in the mega prison in El Salvador, and they were going to reveal brutal and torturous conditions inside the confinement center, featuring interviews by the correspondent who was there. Do I think that there's probably some truth to this? Yeah, probably. I'm not going to say there isn't. I think that would be really short-sighted to say that that's not the case, that there's things that are going on. But 3 hours before air, that had been promoted, they pulled the story. Now, the media is trying to tie it into the, Ellison's wanting to buy Netflix, or wanted to buy Warner Brothers and beat Netflix. They're going to tie into that, saying that was she told to hold the story because of that? It's very possible. It's very possible she was told to hold the story because it would look bad, and for them, and make Trump mad if they want his backing for the Warner Brothers purchase. That's completely a strong possibility, because other places that the problems with news when they're owned by a corporation, you're beholden to what they want sometimes, but. And I like to say that, real news people, real reporters will go out there and do it anyway. And you can when it's your own thing. Because if you're being, paid and your job is underneath one of these rich people that own these places, you're kind of beholden to what they want to do. It is what it is. Is it right? No, but it's what it is. They said that they did 3 hours before that Weiss pulled the story, she wanted to hold for an on-the-record input from the Trump administration, which she hadn't been given, and apparently she still wasn't given. And what she said was, my job is to make sure that all stories we publish are the best they can be. Holding stories that aren't ready for whatever reason, that they lack sufficient context, or that they are missing critical voices, happens every day in the newsroom. Yeah, but you should have taken care of that before you advertised it, is what I think people are saying. They finally got it to air on Sunday night. It was about a month later. Still, the administration didn't give any kind of record to it. And they said that the delay prompted internal friction. Yeah, a bunch of people in CBS were mad because they wanted to put out a hit piece. It didn't get put out. They were pissed about it. A lot of these people have certain political leanings, as we know. We've talked about it at length. We're going to talk about it from the other article because they're very, very mad about this whole situation. They said that Weiss and the producers personally sought interviews with Trump administration, particularly with the Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, and border czar Tom Homan, but none of them were granted. And they made several attempts to interview them to get their side, but they declined the request. So they, basically put it out there. And they said that Weiss seemed to be wedded to the idea of news coverage as a contest of ideas in which both sides of the debate are equally valid. No, that's not about being equally valid. It's about the fact that we have had nothing but, and this is why people don't trust the news anymore. This is why they don't trust the news. It's because it has always been skewed to one side. And that's how it is. It used to be there was different news outlets, and you could go to the news outlets and get kind of an overview of both sides, and where you could make up your own mind. Here's the evidence, you decide. We don't do that anymore. Now it's just, what flavor do you like? Do you like the left flavor or right flavor? And they both do this where they cherry pick data and they skew it to one side. I'm sorry, but the idea of presenting both sides of an argument, and then, or even be able to question the other side as to, is this true? What do you think? Is what news is about. It's not a bad thing to be wedded to the idea that you need to hear both sides, or both sides need to be presented so that you can figure out what the truth is. That is actually just, doing your due diligence as a reporter. Maybe the reason people liked her Substack and why it got bought out was because that's what she was doing. But they're like, she's wedded to the idea. And in which both sides of the debate are equally valid. That's not the same thing as saying you're both presenting it. They're saying both sides have a chance to speak. It's not saying they're both valid. At a time when the Trump administration is routinely lying to the public and straining to justify blatant abuse of executive power. Again, this is what the New Yorker said, or of course they're saying that. They lean left. I would argue, yeah, what's that like? If they hadn't been lying to the public for years prior, I don't think people would have voted the way they did. You talk about lying to the public, but Biden's completely fine, right? There was nothing wrong with Biden. It was just all in people's imaginations. That's what the media kept telling people. I don't want to hear it about routinely lying to the public when you have been doing this yourselves. These other outlets have been doing it themselves forever, because it's not about the truth. It's about their truth. And that's the problem. That is the problem at the heart of the whole situation, is that news outlets aren't reporting in a fair, unbiased way to get to the truth. They are all reporting in blatant abuses of routinely lying to the public. They're doing it. They've been doing it. That's why people don't trust you anymore. And then they're like, because they've just been blatantly lying. It's like, what do you think you've been doing for years? A lot of you guys are. It's the truth of the twist. It's the truth if you squint and tip your head sideways because it leans the way you want it to. Sometimes the truth is the truth. And, people need to start realizing that, hey, you know what? Both sides have problems. Both sides are guilty of doing this. And people just want the truth. And if people are doing shitty things in power, then yeah, you say so. But you went by years and years and years with protections of people who were doing shitty things, but because they were on your side. And now, you don't want to overlook bad behavior because it's on your side. And people need to start pulling their heads out of their asses and their echo chambers and start listening and looking at both sides and trying to determine what the truth actually is. And that's what the problem is. And that's what they're pissed about, because how dare somebody want to look into it and give both sides a fair chance to have, or at least respond to okay, this is what they used to do. Here's the footage. What is your response to this? Let me ask you pointed questions, and then people can judge themselves. Are they lying? Why aren't they answering the questions? That's how they used to do it. That's how they always did. That's how people understood it, so that you could, listen to it and be like, wait a minute, that seems fishy to me. Or, oh, that explains it. That makes sense. You're not even given that opportunity. You're not even allowed to look at all the data and listen to what their excuses are or their reasoning is, and then form an opinion. You only can form the opinion they want you to have. That is the problem. And then this hit piece over here on the New Yorker, it's basically like a life story of her, but they're really pissed. And I think this paragraph sums it up. Bari Weiss, the editor-in-chief of CBS News, was talking about watching interviews off camera, talking about, that she was an editor at the New York Times, and she condemned the paper as doctrinally liberal and out of touch. Yeah, because a lot of these places, and I would say the New Yorker is one of them, are like that. Just like I'd say the far right media, if they're leading that way, that they could be the same way. You're out of touch. You're too busy in your own, like a political bias that you're not doing your job. So she started a Substack that would become the Free Press. It was an anti-woke, and it was a rejoinder to the mainstream media that she argued pandered to an audience of elites who were turning against America. She's not wrong. Fox News and MSNBC were feeding their audiences political heroin, and I'd say CNN and stuff like that too. Elsewhere, she added, I think there's a lot of people in the country who are politically homeless and who feel like the old label Republican, Democrat, conservative, liberal no longer fit them or no longer mean what they used to. That's completely true. Like, all those things are true. As somebody in the middle, I'm telling you, that is true. What she's saying is not wrong, but you're all mad about it because you don't want to hear that. You want everybody to listen to your political bias. But the problem is you have extremes that are screaming on both sides. And I think Fox has walked it back somewhat. They're still over, I think, definitely left. But you have to have somebody who's trying to like stick it in the middle and give both sides. There's nothing wrong with that. Just because you want to see all the doom and gloom, what you put together, and you have political bias and political leaning, and you work someplace, doesn't mean that, that's the most fair way to show it. This is why people are turning against you. But it goes on and on again. Oh my God, it's talking about her whole history and all this stuff about how she was in second grade. And it just goes on and on and on. And for paragraphs, look at all these paragraphs. Paragraph after paragraph after paragraph of everything she's ever done ever. And how she used to lean left and she criticized Trump and all this other stuff. And it goes on and on and on. Oh my God, where she had her bar mitzvah. Who cares? And it goes, I'm not kidding. This is still going on, right? Still going on. And then you get down here, finally you get down here. So now they're talking about the late night cancellation and all this other stuff and Trump's lawsuit against CBS and everything else. And they're still going. And then they're talking about what happened. Okay, a few days before, after, I don't know, like 20 paragraphs, a few days after Christmas, 60 Minutes was set to airport to cover CCOD or whatever, the prison in El Salvador. The Trump administration has sent more than 200 deportees to in March. The men, most of whom were from Venezuela, had been speared out of the U.S. with a series of late-night flights in violation of federal judge's court order. Okay, let's talk about the federal judge's court order here for a minute. Why is it that every federal judge, anywhere, thinks that they have the right to determine things that aren't in their jurisdiction? It's an ongoing problem as much as the Supreme Court is trying to do something about it because every federal judge is overstepping their power. But that's a whole other story. Let's talk about that later. They said that this Sharon Alfonsi, a 60-Minute correspondent, interviewed two of them, people at these judges or whatever, or people at the location, I'm not sure which. The stories are harrowing. Blood everywhere, screams, people crying, people who couldn't take it and were urinating and vomiting on themselves. I completely believe it's true. I mean, I personally believe that some of this is probably true. She'd reached out to the Trump administration for comment and received only a cursory 2-sentence response. And like all 60-minute stories, the segment had been fact-checked and vetted by the network's legal department. 5 separate screenings were held for various editorial stakeholders. Okay, so the lawyer said it was fine, and their editorial stakeholder said it was fine. But she was supposed to attend the final screening, but she missed it, and she didn't see the segment until late that night, emailing suggestions for a few changes that were incorporated in the piece. The network promoted the segment as a lead story, and then, the reporter went home to Texas. And then the story was being finalized. They said almost exactly as Ellison was pursuing another major expansion. He wanted to put the Warner Bros. Discovery bid out there. And they were afraid that it was going to mess up with Trump because he would be mad. That's probably likely part of it. If I'm being completely honest with you, do I think they would tell them not to run the story because it might piss Trump off and they might just backing for an acquisition? Yeah, probably. Do I think it's right to do that? No. But do I think that it's right to run one story without, getting, any kind of report from the other side? No, I don't. So they said 60 Minutes already, aired other things. They already promoted it. And Weiss, who reports directly to Ellison, told 60 Minutes producer she was concerned that no official from the Trump administration had been interviewed on camera for the piece, which is a fair concern. Specifically, she wanted to include the administration's arguments for its use of Alien Enemies Act and basically ask them, question, why were they not given due process? Why this happened? Explain why they're doing it. Ask the hard questions. Instead of just going to a prison and interviewing men, who were there. Ask the hard questions. There's a genuine debate here. She's not wrong. She tracked down numbers from Tom Homan, the border czar, and Stephen Miller, Trump's chief immigration advisor, and she sent the 60 Minutes team. These are fair questions. And 3 hours for the broadcast, the piece was pulled. My job is to make sure all the stories are published the best they can be, she said, which we talked about. And then the reporter felt betrayed. In my view, pulling it now after a very rigorous internal check has been met is not an editorial decision. It's a political one. Says the people who never interviewed the other side because they were just trying to put out a piece I guarantee is skewed very negative to one side. Don't give me, it's a political decision. What decisions have you people been making that aren't politically motivated to your side? Look, I think this is partly because of Ellison's and wanting to do the deal with by Warner Brothers? Yes. Do I think that it's partly because, they wanted to make sure that the Trump administration had a say in it so they don't have any problems later? Probably. Is it probably true that their conditions are not good at this place? Yes, I'm sure it probably is. All these things can be true at once. And someone's saying, hey, I think we need to look at this from different angles to make sure we have it covered, fairly. And we have a debate about it so people get the facts or get to hear what they have to say, is a fair thing. Now, the fact remains that the Trump administration people didn't give comments, didn't give statements, so they ran it as is. Also fair. They should have done all this before they announced they were going to run the show. Also true statement. All these things can be true at once. And they got aired. But it doesn't... They ran it the way it was. They had an opportunity to speak, talk about it. They turned it down. So if it looks bad for them, that's on them now. But I don't think what she did was wrong. I think wanting to look at it from different sides, I think wanting the opportunity to be able to ask them the hard questions, the opportunity, to wait until we had a chance to see if we can get a better result and more information for the people that want to watch the show was not a bad thing. Airing or advertising it before it aired when you weren't ready, that was probably not smart. It is what it is. So now it goes on and on about how everybody's mad that, she didn't do what she was supposed to do. And sources told me that Weiss readily realizes that she admits that she's not knowledgeable and she made mistakes. They said it makes them wonder if someone called once the promo was aired and complained. Probably. So basically it's one insider coming to them with things about her. And they wrote this entire 30, 40 paragraph piece. And it's about everybody, how everybody was mad. Don't talk about political leanings and politics directing your decisions when you yourself are doing the same thing. But this whole fiasco is another example of why people don't trust the media. It is what it is. But I still don't think wanting, to have both sides of the argument, wanting to ask questions is unreasonable and a bad thing. I don't know. Please let me think, let me know what you think. I'm sure that you're going to. Comment, let us know, and we'll talk to you later. Bye.